Hello, it's the Educated Grunt here again today. Sorry this is a bit delayed. I was been busy working on my business and also kind of worried about this new purge they have on military history sites on YouTube, so I wanted to kind of wait and see before I uploaded this. This is kind of a critical time for content creators like me in the military history genre. We're being purged for what they call hate speech. I don't understand it. I try not to be hateful or racist in any way, shape, or form. I don't even swear, and people who know me know I curse like a sailor, but that's neither here nor there. What I need from you people is if you could please like, share, subscribe, leave me a comment, interact, because that is one thing that the YouTube algorithm and the bigwigs at YouTube actually like. And it would help me and my channel immensely, and hopefully I won't be removed for so-called hate speech. With that being said, let's get on to episode 5 of my Forgotten Heroes of Chosin, of the Chosin Reservoir series. On 3rd of November 1950, again beginning about 2200 hours, the Chinese made another of their dishearteningly regular attacks. From the beginning, it showed more determination than those two from the two previous nights. Although it did not appear to be well coordinated nor concentrated in any one area. Captain Erwin B. Bigger, company commander of Company D, 1st Battalion, 32nd Infantry, in an attempt to confuse the Chinese, hit upon the idea of firing a different colored flare every time the enemy fired one, and blowing a whistle whenever the enemy blew one. Soon after midnight, when the enemy attack was most intense, a small group of Chinese broke into the perimeter at one end. Lieutenant Colonel Faith sent his counterattack force to patch up the line. From then until morning, there were 5 different penetrations and as many counterattacks. One of the penetrations just before the night first light on the 1st of December resulted in an enemy seizure of a small hill within the perimeter, thus endangering the defenses. Battalion headquarters called Company D to ask if someone there could get enough men together to counterattack and just dislodge the Chinese. Lieutenant Robert D. Wilson, a platoon leader, volunteered for the job and said, "Come on, all you fighting men, we have a counterattack to make." During the night, Lieutenant Wilson had directed mortar fire, but the ammunition was gone by this time. Assembling a force of 20 to 25 men, he waited a few minutes until there was enough light. His force was short on ammunition. They were completely out of rifle grenades and having only small arms ammunition and 3 hand grenades. Lieutenant Wilson carried a recaptured Tommy gun. When daylight came, the men moved out. Lieutenant Wilson, out in the front, leading, knew the objective. An enemy bullet had struck his arm, knocking him to the ground. He got up and went on. Another bullet struck him in the arm or chest. "That one bit," he said as he continued. A second or two later, another bullet struck him in the forehead, killing him. Sergeant First Class Fred Segua had taken charge and was in turn killed a few minutes later. Eventually, the remaining men succeeded in driving the Chinese out of the perimeter. Even after daylight, which usually ended the enemy attacks, the Chinese had made one more attempt to knock out a 75mm recoilless rifle that guarded the road. In about 2 platoon strength, they came up along a deep ditch along the road to the south. Lieutenant Campbell rushed, and Corporal Armentrout Lieutenant Campbell rushed Corporal Armentrout forward to plug the gap with his machine gun. Hit by a mortar fire the night before, the water jacket of the machine gun was punctured, and after several minutes the gun jammed. Armentrout sent his assistant back for the other heavy machine gun, the last good one in the section. With it, and by himself, Corporal Armentrout killed at least 20 enemy soldiers and stopped the attack. At 0700 hours on the 1st of December, as Lieutenant Campbell was telling the battalion S4 Captain Raymond Vanderville that everything was under control, a mortar shell landed 10 feet away and knocked him to the ground. Fragments sprayed his left side and wounded 2 other men. Someone pulled Campbell under a nearby truck and helped him to the aid station. The aid station squad tent was full. About 50 patients were inside. Another 35 wounded were laying outside in the narrow gauge railroad cut where the aid station was located. Dazed with shock, Lieutenant Campbell lay outside for about a half an hour. Colonel Faith appeared at the aid station asking all men who could possibly do so come back on the line. If we can hold out for 40 minutes or more, the colonel pleaded, we'll get our air support. There was not much response. Most of the men were very seriously wounded. Come on, you lazy bastards, Faith said, and give us a hand. That roused several men, including Campbell. Because he could not walk, he crawled 20 yards along the railroad track and found a carbine with one round in it. Dragging the carbine, Campbell continued to crawl to the west. He collapsed into a foxhole before he reached the lines and waited till someone helped him back to the aid station. This time he got inside for treatment. The medical personnel had no more bandages. There was no more morphine. They cleansed his wounds with disinfectant, and he dozed there for several hours. As it was everywhere else in the perimeter, the situation at the aid station was the most difficult. Near the medical tent, a tarpaulin had been stretched over the railroad cut to shelter additional patients, and the other wounded were located in two small Korean huts. Company aid men, when they could, assisted the medical officer, Captain Vincent J. Navarre, and 3 enlisted men who worked continuously at the aid station. 2/3 of the number 2 medical chests were lost during the withdrawal from the first positions. The jeep hauling them had simply disappeared. Thus, most of the surgical equipment was gone. Aid men improvised litters from ponchos and field jackets. One split set was on hand. However, there was plenty of blood plasma. The aid station had one complete number 1 chest. When the bandages were gone, aidmen used personal linens, handkerchiefs, undershirts, and towels. They gathered up parachutes and recovered with the airdrop bundles, using the white ones for dressings and the color ones to cover the wounded to keep them warm. Sergeant Leon Pogolski of the headquarters company kitchen had managed to save 2 stoves, coffee, and some cans of soup. He set the stoves up in the aid station, and the seriously wounded got hot soup or coffee. Task Force Faith had been under attack for 80 hours in sub-zero weather. None of the men had washed or shaved during that time, nor eaten more than a bare minimum. Frozen feet and hands were common. Worst of all, the weather appeared to be getting worse, threatening air support and aerial resupply. Few men believed they could hold out another night against the determined attacks. Captain Seaver, commander of Company C, 1st Battalion, 32nd Infantry, sat on the edge of a hole discussing the situation with Major Curtis, the Battalion S3. An enemy mortar shell landed 10 to 15 feet away and exploded without injuring either of them. Seaver shrugged his shoulders. Major, he said, I feel like I'm 1,000 years old. A single low-flying Marine fighter bomber appeared over the surrounded task force at about 10 o'clock on the 1st of December. Establishing radio contact with the Tactical Air Control Party, the pilot stated that if the weather improved as forecasted, he would guide more tactical aircraft into the area shortly after noon. He also stated that there were no friendly forces on the road between Faith's perimeter and Hagururi. Lieutenant Colonel Faith decided to break out of the perimeter and reach Hagururi in a single dash rather than risk another night where he was. He planned to start the breakout about 1 o'clock so that it would coincide with the airstrikes. He ordered the artillery batteries and heavy mortar company to shoot all remaining ammunition before that time and then to destroy all their weapons. He placed the 1st Battalion, 32nd Infantry in the lead, followed by the 57th Field Artillery Battalion, the Heavy Mortar Company, and the 3rd Battalion of the 31st Infantry. Half-track vehicles of Battery D, 115th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Automatic Weapons Battalion were interspaced throughout the column to minimize the danger from enemy attack. Colonel Faith wanted the column to be as short as possible, only enough vehicles to haul out the wounded. All the other men would walk. Vehicles, equipment, and supplies that could not be carried, or that were not necessary for this move, he ordered destroyed. The men selected 22 of the best vehicles, 2.5-ton trucks, 3/4-ton trucks, and 1/4-ton trucks, and lined them up on the road. They drained the gasoline from the other vehicles and filled the tanks of the ones that are going to take. They destroyed the remaining vehicles with white phosphorus and thermite grenades. About noon, someone roused Lieutenant Campbell and said, were going to make a break for it. He and the other wounded men, he and the other several hundred wounded men by this time were placed in the vehicles. They lay there for about a half hour while the final preparations for the breakout attempt were made. Enemy mortar shells began dropping in the vicinity. Colonel Pace selected Company C, 1st Battalion, 32nd Infantry as the advance guard for the column. Lieutenant Mortrud's platoon. The unit least hurt was to take this point position for the company. Supported by a dual 40mm half-track, this platoon would clear the road for the vehicle column. Lieutenant Mortrud, who was wounded in the knee, had planned to ride the half-track. Company A, followed by Company B, would act as flank security east of the road. There was no danger at the beginning from the breakout from the direction of the reservoir, which was to the west. Friendly planes appeared overhead. Mortrud moved his platoon out about 1,300 hours. Lieutenant Smith led out Company A. The men of these units had walked barely out of the area that had been their defensive perimeter when enemy bullets whistled past or dug into the ground behind them. At almost the same time, 4 friendly planes in the close support of the breakout action missed their target and dropped napalm bombs on the lean element. The half-track in which Mortrud had planned to ride was set ablaze. Several men were burned to death immediately. About 5 others, their clothes on fire, tried frantically to beat out the flames. Everyone scattered. Disorganization followed. Up to this point, the units had maintained organizational structure, but suddenly they began to fall apart. Intermingling in panic, they disintegrated into leaderless groups of men. Most of the squad and platoon leaders and the commanders of the rifle companies were dead or wounded. Many of the key personnel from the battalion were casualties. Captain Harold B. Bauer, commander of Headquarters Company, Major Crosby P. Miller, Battalion Executive Officer, Major Curtis, the Battalion S3, Captain Wayne Powell, Battalion S2, Lieutenant Henry M. Moore, Ammunition and Pioneer Platoon Leader, had all been wounded. The same was true of the important non-coms. No one had slept for several days. One thought that drove the men: they had to keep moving if they were to get out. Even those who were not wounded were strongly tempted to lay down and go to sleep, but they knew they would be lost if they did. Lieutenant Mortrud gathered 10 men around him and proceeded to carry out his orders. Firing as they advanced, they dispersed 20 or more enemy soldiers who fled, as they ran down the road screening in vicinities at the enemy. Mortrud and his men encountered several small Chinese groups which they killed or scattered. One such group was putting in communication lines, another was repairing a wrecked jeep. Out of breath and hardly able to walk on his wounded leg, Mortrud and those men still with him reached a blown-out bridge 2 miles or more south of the starting point. Attracting no enemy fire, they stopped to rest and to wait for the column. A little later, a Company A platoon leader, Lieutenant Herbert Mashburn Jr., came up with the group of men and joined them. Together they crossed under the bridge and moved to the east, then to the south, to reconnoiter. Enemy fire had come from the high ground to the northeast. Most of the men fell to the ground to take cover. Lieutenant Mortrud wondered why the vehicles were not coming down the road, since he expected the column to follow him closely. As he lay on the slope of the ridge, a bullet had struck him in the head and knocked him unconscious. The main body of the column, meanwhile, waited until Colonel Faith could reorganize it. Since C Company and part of Company A were disorganized by the burning napalm, he ordered Company B to take the lead and advance with marching fire to the blown-out bridge. The vehicular column moved slowly down the road, keeping abreast of Company B, which was sweeping the high ground. Air cover was continuous. It was mid-afternoon or later when the truck column stopped at the blown-out bridge, where it was necessary to construct a bypass over the rough and steep banks of the stream. A half-track towed the trucks across, while the able-bodied men with the column took care to prevent them from overturning. In the middle of this tediously slow process, Chinese riflemen began firing at the trucks and men. One truck, the one in which Lieutenant Campbell was laying, stalled in the middle of the stream. Enemy fire struck some of the wounded men in the truck. Campbell, figuring it would be better for him to get out and move under his own power, crawled out of the truck. He started walking up a ditch toward the lead vehicles, which had stopped again a third of a mile ahead. After he'd gone about 200 yards, enemy riflemen began shooting at him, forcing him to the ground. He discovered that his head was clear now, and the feeling of weakness had vanished. Although his leg side pained him, And although his cheek and mouth were swollen for the wound he'd received 3 days before, he felt pretty good. When a 3-ton truck came by, after about 20 minutes, he got on it. He never did learn what happened to the truck he had left. Back at the blown-out bridge, the column moved as fast as a half-track could drag the trucks across through the bypass. The battalion motor officer, Lieutenant Hugh R. May, stood at the road supervising the operation. He appeared to be unconcerned about the enemy fire, which remained heavy as long as there were men and trucks at the roadblock. It was late in the afternoon before the last truck was to cross. When Lieutenant Mortard regained consciousness on the slope of the ridge, he noticed friendly troops moving up the hill in the area to the south of the blown-out bridge. An aide-man, Corporal Alfonso Camoisas, came past and bandaged his head. Then Mortard stumbled across the ridgeline, passing many American dead and wounded on the slope. Dazed and in a condition of shock, he followed the group of men where he could vaguely see ahead of him. The group went toward the reservoir and walked out onto the ice. While all this was taking place, another enemy roadblock had halted the lead trucks in the column at the hairpin curve a half a mile beyond the blown-out bridge. At least 2 machine guns and enemy riflemen kept the area under fire. Colonel Faith, a blanket around his shoulders, walked up and down the line of trucks as he organized a group to assault the enemy who were firing from the positions east of the road. Each time he passed his Jeep in the center of the column, he fired several bursts from the 50 caliber machine gun mounted on it. Heavy enemy fire also came from the west of the road from the direction of the reservoir. This fire raked the truck column, hitting the wounded men in the trucks. Darkness was not far off. Colonel Faith was desperately anxious to get his column moving and the wounded men out before the Chinese closed in on them. He got some wounded into the ditch to form a base of fire, then organized several groups to assault the enemy positions. One group of men under Captain Bigger, the commander of Company D, 1st Battalion, 32nd Infantry, was to clear out the area between the road and the reservoir. Colonel Faith instructed the S2 of the 1st Battalion, 32nd Infantry, Major Robert E. Jones, to gather all available men and move them into the high ground south of the hairpin curve, while he himself organized another group to move to the high ground just north of the roadblock at the hairpin curve. They would then attack from the opposite direction at the same time. Captain Bigger, blinded in one eye by a mortar fragment and wounded in the leg, supported himself on a mortar aiming stake and waved his group up the hill, hobbling up himself. Like Captain Bigger, the majority of the group was walking wounded. It was almost dark when Major Jones and Colonel Faith, each with 100 men or less, launched their attacks against the roadblock and knocked it out. Colonel Faith was hit by grenade fragments and was mortally wounded. A man next to him, hit by the fragments from the same grenade, tried to help him down the road, but was unable to do so. Some of the other men came by and carried him down to the road and put him in the cab of a truck. Colonel Faith's task force, which had started to break up soon after it got underway that afternoon, now disintegrated completely because of those men who commanded the battalion's companies and platoons were either dead or wounded so seriously they could no longer exercise control. The task force crumbled into individuals or into groups of 2 or 10 or 20 men. Major Jones, with the help of several others, took charge of the largest group of men remaining, those who stayed with to help with the trucks carrying the wounded. Enemy fire had severely damaged the truck column. Several trucks were knocked out and blocked the column, and the others had flat tires. The time was about 1700 hours on the 1st of December, and it was almost dark. Those who were able now removed all the wounded men from 3 destroyed 2.5-ton trucks which blocked the column, carried the wounded to the other trucks, and then pushed the destroyed vehicles over the cliff toward the reservoir. Someone shouted for help to gather up all the men who had been wounded during the roadblock action. For a half an hour, the able-bodied men searched both sides of the roads. When the column was ready to move again, the wounded were piled too deep in most of the trucks. Men rode across the hoods and on the bumpers, or 6 or 8 men hung to the sides of each of the truck. After reforming the truck column with all the operating vehicles, Major Jones organized as many able-bodied and walking wounded men as he could, between 100 and 200 men, and started south down the road. The trucks were to follow. This is the end of episode 5. Thank you so much for your time and listening. Please like, share, subscribe, leave me a comment. It's real critical for me to get some help to stay on this and to keep doing this and helping to educate and tell the story of the men of Task Force Faith. I appreciate your time, and thanks you for listening. Have a wonderful day.